In this video, I'm going to share with you 12 economic principles or laws that if you learn them and follow them will help you make more money, create more wealth, and protect it. If you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Brown. I'm a former stockbroker who spent years advising the top 1% on how to manage their wealth. And after I made enough money to leave that world behind, I've turned my attention now to teaching people financial strategies that exist outside the mainstream, things you'd never hear from a financial advisor or a stockbroker. Economic law number 1 is that inflation is a wealth transfer from lender to borrower. Many people think of inflation as the process of prices going up, but in the same sense, it is the value of the money that is going down. Because if this year your cost of living is $50,000 for a year, and next year you change nothing about your habits or your lifestyle, but buying the same exact stuff now costs you $55,000 instead of $50,000, you can look at that as if prices are going up, but it's also the purchasing power, the value of your money that is being lost. So how is that a transfer of wealth from lenders to borrowers? Well, it's because if you borrow money today, you are spending it at today's prices. And then in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whenever you pay that money back, you are giving back a specific number of dollars, regardless of what the purchasing power of those dollars is. And so when you give back dollars that are worth less, there has been a wealth transfer from the lender to you, the borrower, because you borrowed something at a higher value and gave something back of a lower value, and you got to keep the difference. Now, it is true that economic power corrupts economically. It is also true that the people who are in control of the money supply are also the biggest borrowers. In other words, the one who is in control of whether or not inflation happens is also the biggest borrower and therefore the biggest beneficiary of inflation continuing to happen. Which means the lesson for economic law number 1 is bet on inflation continuing, because as long as fiat currency is money, inflation will continue, and borrow accordingly. Economic law number 2, the one who gets the money first wins. This is something first described by Richard Cantillon. We now call it the Cantillon effect, and it describes the process of which prices react in which order as new money is printed and comes into an economy. Essentially, the first people to get their hands on the new money get to spend the new money at the old prices. And then as that new money works its way through the economy, it bids up the prices of goods and services and assets. And the last people to get their hands on that money are spending that now old money at the new higher prices. So here's the process. The new money comes into existence via loans, which means the government's going to get their hands on the vast majority of newly printed money. As that money is spent into the economy, first it's going to bid up the prices of assets. That is because the institutions and the politically connected are going to invest in assets to protect themselves from the inflation that is sure to come. As that money then works its way throughout the economy, it's then going to start bidding up the prices of goods and services, which means the cost of living for everyday people is going to go up. After the cost of living goes up, then wage earners are going to get raises in order to compensate them for that cost of living. But here's the kicker, they've already been paying the higher prices all along the way, which means that investors and owners have the biggest benefits from the Cantillon effect, and wage earners and savers are the most negatively affected by this Cantillon effect. So the lesson here is to prioritize business over jobs and investing over saving. This way you can control your own income instead of waiting until the end of the line, until after your cost of living has already gone up, and you get to benefit from the asset prices going up rather than watching the purchasing power of your savings dwindle. Economic law number 3 is that all dollars are loaned into existence. It used to be that paper money was backed up by physical gold somewhere in some vault. That is no longer the case today, ever since 1971, when the entire world delinked from the last vestiges of the gold standard. Today, the way that every dollar is created is by being loaned into existence. For instance, let's say you get paid and you see your paycheck get deposited into your bank account. It doesn't just sit there, otherwise the bank would have no way to pay for all of its infrastructure costs, especially the fat bonuses for its executives, by just watching your money sit there. It has to use your money to go make more money in order to justify its existence. So let's say you get 10 grand deposited into your bank account. It's going to take, let's say, $9,000 of that, and it's going to go make a loan to somebody else. Maybe they loan it to the US government, maybe they loan it to a city government, maybe they loan it to somebody to buy a house or a car or a credit card. Either way, they're loaning those dollars out to somebody else. But if you take it one step farther, you realize, hey, all of that money that was just loaned out, all it did was go into somebody else's bank account. If they loan it to somebody to buy a house, it's going to go into the bank account of the person who's selling the house. They loan it to the US government, it's going to get spent into the bank account of some politician or a social security beneficiary. But at the end of the day, it's still somebody's bank account. And so when that person's bank account gets $9,000, that bank is going to take $8,000 of that and go loan it out to somebody else. Meanwhile, all along the way, every single person's bank account says it has that money in it. You could go get your $9,000 the same as the next person in line could go get their 8, and the same as the next person in line could go get their 7. It looks like that money is all there, but it's just been loaned into existence, been borrowed from a prior bank account. This is why banks are so fragile, because they rely on the hope that you and everybody else won't go try and get all your money out at the same time, because it's not there. It's gone. It's been loaned out. So the lesson for this is to count on bank fragility, because it's literally the way they work. Never keep more than $250,000 in any single bank, because that is the FDIC insured limit. Also, if we want to tag a little bonus lesson from the law before, if the people who get to spend the new money first win and all money is loaned into existence, that also means that if you borrow money to spend, then you are spending newly created dollars at the old prices. Okay, next economic law. Interest rates are the cost of money. Let's take a trip back in time. 5,000 years ago, everybody uses gold coins as money. Example number 1, everybody in the town has a bunch of gold coins in their little savings pile at home. The savings pool is large. Now, if there's one person then who wants to borrow, they're gonna go to everybody in town that has a bunch of savings. They're gonna say, hey, can I borrow from you? You might say 5%. They'll go to the next guy. Hey, he said 5%. How much can I borrow from you for? And that guy might say 4%. They'll bid everybody against each other. And because the savings pool is so large, the borrower has all the power and they'll be able to borrow at a very low interest rate, maybe 1 or 2%. Now, there's a built-in incentive here for everybody who has savings now to go borrow and spend, because you're not making any money on your money. So might as well go put it to productive use. This will drive money out of savings. And if you swing that pendulum too far, eventually now everybody is a borrower and a spender and all the savings have been drained. Now, let's say I'm the only one left in town with any savings. Everybody else is a borrower. They all need to continue borrowing and spending to support all of their debt. So they're going to come to me and ask to borrow from me, and they'll be willing to pay a very high amount. Somebody will maybe be willing to pay 10%. And I'll say, okay, but what about you? And they'll say, okay, well, if you let me borrow from you instead, I'll pay you 15%. And I'll let everybody, all the borrowers, bid against each other, and I might be able to loan out my last coin for 25%. There's a natural incentive here now for anybody who can to build up their savings so they can get back on the saving side so they can loan out, put their money to work without actually having to go do anything. This natural equilibrium for interest rates means that interest rates are the cost of money. And as with the cost of anything in a free market, the price of something will indicate to you, it will be a signal whether that thing is abundant or scarce. The higher the price, the scarcer the good. With interest rates, the higher the interest rate, the scarcer the money. The lower the interest rate, the more abundant the money. And that signal tells people what they should do with that money. And it also creates natural incentives that keeps the supply of money basically in check. As a side note, this means that central banks, who artificially control the cost of money, are 100,000% irrelevant and unnecessary. But today we obviously do not have a free market in money or in interest rates that is set by a central bank, which means we are getting fed artificial signals about the supply or the scarcity of money. But this doesn't mean that these signals are completely useless. If we take a look at the inflation rate and use that to adjust the nominal rate, we get the real interest rate. Further than that, if we look at interest rates for types of debt that are more removed from central control, for instance, instead of looking at the 1-year treasury, maybe we look at 5-year auto loans. Or instead of looking at subsidized 30-year mortgages, maybe we look at hard money construction loans. These free market interest rates paired with adjusting them for the current rate of inflation will give us a better idea of the real scarcity or abundance of the money supply, of the savings pool. Those signals will then give us a better idea of what we should be doing with our money. Which means the lesson here is to borrow when money is cheap and use it for productive purposes, and be a saver and a lender when money is expensive. And by the way, if you're looking for somebody to walk you through exactly what comes next for America, and more importantly, what you can do about it, you need to subscribe to my brand new newsletter, Letters from a Heretic. It's the only place where I'm going to go deeper into some of these topics that I seriously doubt you're going to hear about from anyone else. As soon as you sign up, you're going to start receiving my 5-day series called The Most Dangerous Ideas in America. These are ideas so powerful they could reshape the economic landscape of our nation. We talk about things like the real reason we could be on the verge of World War III, the rise of the House of Saud, the true location of the financial all-seeing eye, a secret manuscript that predicted the end of America, and what it means for your wealth. We talk about America's coming dark summer and even the final phase of the US dollar. So if you're interested in receiving that so you can make better decisions about how to grow and protect your wealth, especially during times of crisis, click the link below, enter your email, and I'll start showing you everything I know. All right, next economic lesson. Leveraged assets are simply dollar shorts. Everybody's heard of shorting stocks, but did you know that anytime you buy an asset using leverage, what you're actually doing is shorting the dollar? Let me show you how. When you short a stock, you're not simply just selling something before you buy it. The first thing you do is you actually have to borrow those shares from somebody who owns them. Then you can sell them on the open market. And then hopefully later on, you can buy them back at a lower price and then deliver those shares back to whoever you borrowed them from. That is mechanically what shorting is. Borrow, exchange back, deliver back. This is opposed to you just buying an asset, which is taking the money you already have and just exchanging it for an asset. So if we pair those two things together, we are doing a leveraged purchase of an asset. For instance, let's say we're going to buy a rental property with a mortgage. First step, we're going to borrow dollars and we're going to exchange those dollars for an asset, a house. The tenant is going to pay us our rent. We're going to use that rent to give back the dollars, the things that we borrow, which means when you buy an asset using leverage, that asset simply becomes a vehicle in order to short the dollar. And based on all the economic laws we've already studied so far, we know that inflation, in other words, the value of the dollar going down, is something that will almost certainly continue over time. Which means the lesson here is that you can make money by buying an asset that increases in value. You can also make money by selling something that decreases in value. Combining those means you purchase an asset with leverage as a vehicle to short a liability, in this case, the dollar. Okay, next economic law. You can only consume what has been produced. This is both on an individual level and on an entire global human race level. If nobody has ever produced bread, nobody can consume any bread. If nobody has ever produced any energy, nobody can consume energy. And if you never produce anything for yourself, that means that your only way to consume something is by consuming something somebody else has produced. There are a couple of ramifications of this economic law. Number one, if you want to get wealthy, you must produce more than you consume. If you earn $100,000 every single year and you spend $100,000 every single year, including taxes, then you are producing exactly what you consume and you will never accumulate or create or store up any wealth. You'll always be exactly at zero. Number two, if you want to benefit the world, you must produce more than you consume. As an example of what I mean here, we have to push this to its extreme and imagine a person who works every single day of their life and never consumes literally anything beyond their basic necessities. They live in the smallest, cheapest place they can live. They eat the smallest, least amount of food they can. And at the end of their life, they've spent as little as possible and they've stored up millions of dollars. In practice, what this person has actually done is they have provided a ton of value to society. They have worked, they have given society labor, given society time, given society products and services, and in return has gotten basically nothing. Because money is not wealth. Money itself is a future claim on wealth. Money is a wealth IOU. Money is a promissory note that at some point in the future, you can take the value of your labor that you have previously given up, and at some point in the future, get some wealth in exchange for that. Get some food, get some luxury, get some entertainment, get some housing. And so the bigger the difference between your production and your consumption is the difference of wealth you have produced for the world. It's the amount you have made the world a better place. And yes, you have an IOU, a future claim on some wealth in the future, but the bigger the difference between the amount you've consumed and the amount you've produced is the amount that you have made the world a better place. Assuming, of course, you are not getting your wealth through theft or force or violence. Now, On the other hand, this also means that if you consume more than you produce, you are only consuming something that somebody else has produced. You are on net taking wealth away from the world. So the lesson here is give more than you take and you will get rich. And by definition, if you're not getting rich, that means you are not giving more than you are taking. Okay, next economic law. Infinite growth happens with finite resources. The definition of growth is getting more for less. An example of this would be 1 gallon of water keeps me hydrated for 1 day. Growth would be 1 gallon of water keeps me hydrated for 2 days. Same amount of resources, I get more out of it. Growth equals more for less. So by definition, infinite growth happens with finite resources. This also means that the amount of resources that are on Earth are not the bottleneck for growth. Now, in reality, we have not even scratched the surface, literally, of the amount of resources that are on Earth. It is not the amount of iron ore on Earth in total that is the bottleneck to producing things that we use iron for. It is the cost-effective gathering of that resource, which means, again, growth is the same amount of resources getting more out of them. Now, that's on an economic level, but on a personal level, this is true as well. When people are choosing between two identical products, they're going to choose based on which one is going to save them the most time, the most effort, or the most money. If you're choosing between two different burger places, you're going to pick option A because it's cheaper if the burger's the same. Or you're gonna choose option B because it's gonna be delivered to you and it's gonna save you the time or the effort to go get it. Which means that progress and economic growth happen as competition in free exchange allows people to freely choose the thing that makes them more better off. And if more and more people value the faster burger over the better tasting burger, that faster burger will win in the free market. And it will make the world a better place because by definition, that's what most people want. Which means the lesson here is that if you give people more for less, either money or time or effort, you'll make money. Again, the definition of growth here is getting more for less, which means the more better off you're able to make people by giving them more and more for less and less, the wealthier you will get. All right, next economic law. That which is taxed will shrink and that which is subsidized will grow. People wonder why the middle class is shrinking, getting hollowed out, disappearing, and it's because the middle class bears the vast majority of the tax burden. That which you tax will shrink. People also wonder why the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing over the last few decades. The cost of housing is skyrocketing over the last few decades. The cost of education is skyrocketing over the last few decades. The cost of military spending is skyrocketing over the last few decades. It's because that which you subsidize will grow. Let's imagine for a moment that you have a budget to go buy a car, $30,000. I come up to you and I say, hey, I want to help you buy out a car. I'm going to write you a check for $10,000 to go buy a car with. You're going to go buy a car for $40,000. Now, maybe not you specifically, you might pocket the money, but most people would take that extra and buy the higher priced car. And that is why costs are rising, because they are subsidized. When you send money at a problem, all it will do is increase demand and therefore increase the price. So what's the lesson here? The lesson for this economic law is learn the tax code to follow the incentives to make more money. You're gonna make more money two ways learning the tax code. Number one, you are going to avoid the things that are taxed the most. For instance, W-2 wages. You can avoid those and replace them with a different form of income that has more advantages. So you're gonna save money from avoiding the things that are being taxed heavily. Number two, you're going to make money by participating in the things that have unfair advantages by being subsidized. Next economic law. Losses are stronger than gains, exponentially so. Losses and gains are not equal in power. Losses are always more powerful than gains. Here's how. Let's say you start off with $10,000 to invest. Year number one, you have an 11% gain. That means after the end of year one, your account total is $11,100. But year number two, you have a 10% loss. Remember, 10% is a smaller amount than 11%. However, your $11,100 turns into $9,990. A 10% loss was a bigger number than an 11% gain. And guess what? It doesn't matter the order that you do this in. Again, let's start off with our $10,000 and start off with the loss of 10%. We end year one with $9,000. If we then follow that up with an 11% gain in year two, we end up again at $9,990. A 10% loss and an 11% gain put together do not even get us back to break even. But that's pretty close. $10 off of 10,000, that's basically the same. The real problem is that the relationship is exponential, which means that losses are exponentially stronger than gains. The bigger the loss you have, the exponentially bigger gain you need to have to get back to break even. So instead of looking at a 10% loss, let's take a look at a 50% loss. If you start off with $10,000 and have a 50% loss, at the end of year one, you're at $5,000. That means to get back up to break even, you need a 100% gain just to get back up to 10,000. And again, it doesn't matter the order. Let's say you start off year one with a 100% gain. That means at the end of year one, you now have $20,000, but you only need a 50% loss now to get back down to 10 grand. So a 10% loss needs an 11% gain to break even, but a 50% loss needs 100% gain to get back to break even. Losses are always more powerful than gains, and you should pay way more attention to losses than to gains. The lesson here is take care of your losses, and your gains will take care of you. The next economic law that will make you rich. 90% of gains are going to come from 10% of your choices. Whether it's the job that you take or leave, the person you marry, the city you live in, or the people you hang around, the overwhelming majority of your life's circumstances are going to be determined by an underwhelming minority of choices. This is true across most of life, not just income and wealth. When you take a look at the stock market, close to 90% of the S&P 500's performance has always been driven by close to 10 to 20% of the number of stocks that are in it. Similarly, the majority of Americans at some point in their life will be in the top 10% of income earners. But the key is, it's not their entire life. The majority of people in the top 10% of income earners spend only a few years there. So there's two lessons for this economic law. Lesson number one, act like every investment you pick will go to zero because it likely will. Pick only what you can hold forever. Manage your risk above all. Don't focus on the potential gains, focus on the consequences if it all goes completely wrong, because it most certainly will. And when you do find that rare winner, write it for all it's worth. Lesson number two, don't act like your high income years will last forever. Act like your income will go back down to zero. Most people who make it into the higher earning thresholds have a very hard time not spending as if that income will be around forever. Statistically, it will only last a few years, so act accordingly. Put as much of it away as possible, and like we said earlier, produce more than you consume. Next economic law, value is subjective and ordinal. Let's say you're at the store and you see a sale on t-shirts that you really like. They're normally $50. Right now they're on sale for $10. If you're anything like me, you might go crazy, buy 5 of them. You might even buy 10 of them, because to you, 10 of those t-shirts is worth more to you than $100. But you're not gonna buy 1,000 of them. You're not gonna go to every store and buy them all out, because the t-shirt is not objectively worth more than $10. It's that the first 10 t-shirts to you are subjectively worth more than the first $100. But after that, your t-shirt craving is satisfied, and the next t-shirt is no longer worth more to you than the next $10. You'd rather have that next $10. To put it another way, you sell 40 or 50 or 60 hours of your time and your labor every single week because you more highly value the money you get in exchange for that time and labor than you do keeping that time and labor for yourself. But it's because you subjectively value that money more than just those first 40 hours. Most people who are given the choice do not work 90 or 100 hours, even though there's technically enough time to do so. It is because after the first 40 or 50 hours, you subjectively now value that time and labor more highly for yourself than the money you would get in exchange. This means that as long as there's no coercion or force involved, when two parties voluntarily exchange with each other, they both become better off than they were before. And when you sell something to somebody who voluntarily chooses to buy that thing from you, you are by definition making them better off because they're choosing to buy that thing from you that they want more than their money. Which means the lesson here is that the more people that you make better off, and the better off you make them, the wealthier you will get. Okay, and finally, the last economic law that will make you rich is realizing, understanding, and living by the fact that the death tax is always 100%. You're not taking anything with you. As the saying goes, that's why you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. When you die, everything you currently own is going to go to one of two places: the government or to your heirs. But we can take it one step farther and see where your money goes after that. If everything you currently own goes to the government, then it just gets paid out to somebody in the form of a paycheck. It goes to a politician's bank account, a military contractor's bank account, a healthcare conglomerate, or social security beneficiary. This is forced redistribution, and what you own will now be owned by somebody else. But if you leave assets to your heirs and they inherit what you currently own, then three things might happen to that money. Number one, it might be invested, in which case your heirs will take the money that is now theirs and they will invest it. They will allocate that capital, temporarily entrusting it to other managers who are using it for productive enterprise that makes the world a better place through free exchange. And part of those profits get returned if that capital is allocated properly. In other words, the money you leave behind could be used to make the world a better place if it's invested properly. Number two, that money might be spent. Let's say you leave your money to somebody who doesn't know how to manage it and they just spend it all. Then everything you currently own is going to go to restaurant owners and restaurant employees. It's going to go to the car manufacturers. It's going to go to luxury experience and restaurants and travel and entertainment, home sellers. Essentially, it's going to be redistributed, but it's going to be done so fairly through the free market. And most importantly, all that money is being redistributed to other people who are actually producing and again, making the world a better place. In other words, this is fair, free redistribution. And then lastly, that money that you leave behind might be given away to charity and further on down the line, then spent or invested as well. But you see here, none of these involve you keeping anything or taking anything with you. The death tax is 100%, which means our lesson here is that our task while we are alive is to do the absolute best we can with the resources we are given. In other words, we are managers, not owners. We do this in three ways. Number one, make as much as you possibly can. Because the more money you make, as we've already seen, the better you are making the world. You are producing things that the world wants and needs and is voluntarily paying you to produce. Number two, save as much as you possibly can. Remember, we have to produce more than we consume. If we consume everything we produce, we are leaving this world exactly as we came into it. We are not leaving the world better off than the one that we got. The more we save and the bigger difference between what we produce and what we consume, the better off of a world we are leaving behind. And number three, give as much as possible. We give through wealth creation and production and making the world a better place. And that is a measure of how much wealth we are able to accumulate. But we also give through actual just giving and charity, giving and asking for nothing in return. Now I say give as much as possible and not give everything, because if you literally give everything, you have nothing saved in order to use for more production. It does nobody any good if you become homeless and then are starting to consume more than you produce. So you can't give everything, but you also can't give nothing, because if you try to give nothing, you'll get nothing. So the way to be the best manager of these assets and resources as we possibly can be is to make as much as we can, save as much as we can, and give as much as we can. Learn, study, and follow these 12 economic principles, and you will make a lot of money, and most importantly, you'll make the world a better place. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.